Hello and welcome to another episode of Imposter Coding. I am the Imposter Coder, Gary. Just a quick reminder, this isn't actually a tutorial, this is just me documenting my learning experience as I go through ROS. So with that said, what I want to do today is I want to build my first server node, and I'm going to use an existing node that I've already made and incorporate a client side to work with that server without spending too much time in the documentation. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to CD into my package that I intend to work in. So I'm going to need to get into my source directory, Larry controller. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a new file. After creating a new file, the next thing I want to do is make it an executable. Okay, now I can open up my new file, or I can open up my template node actually and copy it, then open up a new file and paste my template node. I will delete my unneeded comments. I will give it a new class name. And with that, we should be ready to start working on our project. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do after we set up our node is we want to actually create the service. So here we can see that it's going to be expecting a service type, and that is going to be the add to int. We know we can find add to int from our example interfaces.service, and then we will import add to ints. And then in order to be able to get this, don't forget we need to add it into our package XML file. And we'll do it the same way that we did to get the standard messages for our topics, only this time it'll be example interfaces. And that'll be it for the package XML. We're good to go there. Okay. The next thing it'll be looking for is the string that will represent the channel, essentially, that we'll want the client to subscribe to be able to make a request to this server. Okay, and lastly, we can see that it will be expecting a callback. So we can go ahead and create a callback, or set our callback up now. So as I mentioned before, we do know that we're going to need two arguments. You may think that we want argument A and argument B, but in reality we are going to want request and response. Okay, so now we're going to use request to get access to integer A and integer B from the service, and then we're going to use our response to store the sum of integer A and B in and return. And that will look something like this. So real quick, I just want to know, at the bare minimum, you definitely want to return the response. If you don't return the response, I believe it's going to throw an error because it's going to be expecting that response in the service call. So if it doesn't get it, it's not going to like it. And I'm going to just throw in a quick logger so that way on the server side of the node we will see something going on. Just so that way it's just not an empty terminal. Okay, so we're going to take our response.sum and we're going to set it equal to request A plus request B. We're going to do a quick log adding request A to okay. Good thing we double checked that. Look at that. Oops. That makes a difference. Okay, looks good. And down here we shouldn't have to really do anything to make it work. I apparently forgot to copy the very bottom of the template node right here. We could just copy it. Okay. Now we should have everything that we need. Our server node should be good to go, but we do have to be able to fire this node up, so we'll go ahead and go into our setup.py file, and we're going to have to add it to our entry point. So we'll create a new line. We'll add a new node or a new name here that we can call from the terminal, from the command line to fire the node up. We'll call it battery server node. It's in the Larry controller package. And the file name is setbattery.py. So we'll add it there. And we're going to still call the main. And that node should be ready to rock and roll. Now this is the more tricky part, where we're going to add the client functionality to our monitor status node. So more or less the only real place that I could see to use the add to int in my project is replace this line with it. So I know it's kind of overkill to build an entire node just to replace that single line, or these two lines I should say, but that's what we're going to do. Okay, so once again the first thing I want to do more or less is I want to create my client. But the best way to do this is to do it with a class method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and the reason why I'm doing this is just so that way instead of having this line here, I could just call this method down here. So more or less what I would essentially be doing is something like so now that I have that, I can actually, just to kind of show you more or less what I want to do, or what I intend to do, would be self.status is going to now equal okay, so now more or less instead of just having it say self.status minus equal 10 here, what I would essentially be doing is I would say self dot call add to int server, and then I would pass in my first parameter, which would be self dot status, which is the current battery level, and then I would pass in the next integer, which in this case would be I would be taking 10 away because I would not be plugged in. And then down here where I am plugged in and I'm charging, what I would do is replace this line with this, only instead I would be adding 10. With that said, now we can move forward. So once again, back to where I was at originally, the first thing that I want to do is I want to create my client. Here we can see the first thing that it's requesting is once again our service type. So we'll throw it in here. Okay. And now we'll put it in there. The next thing it will be looking for is that string value that tells it what channel to be, logging into, more or less. Let's grab it from here. I do like to copy and paste this. Oh, I never actually added my callback. Alright, so that should be good to go. With that said, now we can go ahead and grab our string value that we're going to need on the other side. Come back to our monitor. Go ahead and add our string here. And I think that's all we actually need. Yeah, the rest of it we actually don't need to worry about. That is it. So now that we've created our client, the next thing that we're actually going to go ahead and do is we want to check to make sure that the service is actually available. We want to see if there's any server node that's actually available on that channel. So we can do that by saying okay. So what we've got going on here is our client comes with a pre-built method called wait for service, which checks this channel to see if there's a server available. It's going to check that channel every 1 second. And if there is a server available, it will return true. But if there is not a server available, it will return false. So while this is false, what it's going to do, or what I'm going to have it do, is go ahead and just return or it's not going to return anything. It's going to do a console log, in a sense. But we're going to use our self.getLogger. Okay, so if you notice, this time I used warn instead of info. That's more or less just going to make it so that way it displays a different color in our console. So instead of being white like we've seen in the past, it'll now display yellow. So now after checking to see if the server is available, what we're going to do is we're going to work on what happens if the server is available. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to create a request object using add to inst.R for request, because I want to be able to assign the A and B values to be able to send over to the server, so that way the server can actually add them and then return them to us. So with that said, I want to now set the A and B properties of my new request object. And like I said, these are predetermined because we just pulled them from the add to inst server, or the add to inst service. Okay, so in the future, a lot of times these calculations or these functions that we may be calling might take a little bit of time, and ultimately we don't want the whole program or everything else to shut down just to wait for this function to return. So we need to make sure that we run this asynchronously. So what we can do is we can create what they call a future object, and we will be able to use another method that's provided to us with our client object called call async, and that's where we'll pass in our request. So now when we make this call, or we say client call async request, it's going to make our request. But we're going to store it in this future object, and that gives us the, I believe that's the idea behind it, is so that way it gives us the option to add a callback function to that object. So that way once we get the response back from the server, we can fire the callback function and more or less do something with that new material or that new data that we just received. The way we will do that is with future object on done callback. So now in here, basically what it's saying is that we could pass in any callback that we want. So just the way I like to do it, what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to predefine my next callback. This is what I want my client know to do when I get the response from the server. So essentially in this case, what I'm going to have it do is I'm going to have it update my update my status to the returned sum value from the server. Okay, so now we're ready to pass in our callback function into our add done callback. But before I do, I was thinking about actually passing in along with it the A and B values, so that way I could perhaps log all this information in this callback. The best way that we could do that is using a tool that comes with us, I believe, through Python itself, and that would be, it's called Partial. And we get that from, I believe, Func and yes, Partial. Okay, so the way that works is instead of just coming down here and passing in self.set new status callback like we normally would, what we can do now is we can say Partial, and inside here we can pass in our callback function, and then we could pass in any parameters that we want, and that would look something like this. Okay, so the way that this works is, the first thing that we need to pass in is we pass in the callback function that we intend to call, and then we're going to pass in all of our parameters. And as we pass them in, what we're going to do is we're going to define the parameter as it's to be expected down here, and then we're going to pass in the argument for that parameter, which in this case happens to be A. So another way to look at it as if this were to be AA and this were to be BB, down here I would want it to be AA and BB, but we'll leave it A and B. So now we can come down here and we can start working on our set new status callback. We do know that we're going to want A and B. What we're also going to get, however, is called a future argument. And that's going to come by default when we use our future callback add done callback, or future object add done callback. And this future object is where we're going to actually get our response from. Okay, so what I want to do in this function is I just want to go ahead and grab our sum, our new sum from the future object, and then I want to update our status to equal that sum, and then I'm just going to do a quick console log or a get logger. So let me just run through that real quick and and see what happens. Okay, so real quick, I ended up going with a try except, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to see if we got our result, and if we got our future, and if inside our future we have a result, and if it does have a result, we're going to set our status to be equal the response dot sum, and then we'll do a quick get logger. It'll be an info status, and it'll basically say our old status was A, our increment amount was B, so that'll either be A or minus 10 or plus 10, and then it'll give us our new status, or the res.sum. And then if there's any errors with this, we'll run an exception, and we'll run it as E. More or less what we're going to do is we'll do another get logger, but I would like to point out that we're going to do an error log this time, so this time it should show up as red. And I think with that, this should be good to go. Okay, so I had to open up my terminal again because it got closed. First thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to want to cd back out into my workspace. Then I'm going to want to build the project because I added a new file, so I definitely got to build the project, or build the package at least. Got a successful build, so we should have some luck, maybe, with our fingers crossed. Let's go ahead and start firing up some of these nodes. I guess let's start with opening up a couple of new terminals. Should need 3 of them. Okay, we'll go ahead and alright, let's first fire up, it doesn't really matter, it shouldn't matter what order we do this in, but let's go ahead and fire up the display node. Let's get our server node actually going second. So you can see we hit ourselves a little error. I'm sure you might have caught it earlier when I was typing it. It's not battery, it's battery. Let's come back here. And oops. And let's actually correct that typo while I'm looking at it as well. We'll go ahead and I'm going to actually just cancel those. I'm going to close this. We're going to rebuild our project because I changed my setup.py. So I think we're going to need to rebuild the project. Let's get it rebuilt. And try this again. Alright, our battery server node looks like it's running. Oh. And let's create one more terminal and see what happens when we run our display node. Okay, so I had to stop for a minute and actually look into what was going on, and ultimately I didn't find really anything. All I did was rebuild the package, close all my terminals and reopen them, and we could see that they're all actually working now. Just to give it a little bit more clarity. I'll go ahead and kill them all. And then I will fire them all back up one by one. We can see hello world from the display status node. We'll fire up the monitor node. You can see that it says hello. We can see that it's actually saying hey. You might want to check the server. The server's not running. We'll fire up the server node. And now we can see that ultimately our monitor status node is more or less making a call to our server node. Our server node is making an increment. It's adding or subtracting the value to our status and returning it back to our monitor node. And our monitor node is updating our status node, and our status node is telling us how many amps are in our battery. And that's basically it for today. Alright, thank you for tuning in. If you like this video, or if this video has helped you out, or if it maybe even encouraged you into trying new things of your own, go ahead and smash that like button. If you would like to see where this project goes, or where I end up going with my journey in ROS, go ahead and subscribe. That way you'll stay up to date with all of my new videos that I post. Until next time, stay happy, stay coding.